Phyllis Diller was unlike anyone else in comedy. With her electric hair, loud costumes, and unforgettable laugh, she became a one-of-a-kind figure who shattered barriers in a world where women were rarely welcomed on the stage. She poked fun at herself mercilessly, joking about her looks, her cooking, her age, and her imaginary husband, Fang. To audiences, she seemed fearless, a woman who had nothing to hide and nothing to lose. For decades, people admired her ability to take the things women were often most insecure about and turn them into laughter. But behind that curtain of jokes and wigs, there was something Phyllis never shared, a secret that revealed not just her own vulnerabilities but also the brutal reality of show business. She built a career out of making fun of her flaws, yet in private she was desperately trying to erase them. For decades, the truth stayed buried, masked by punchlines and applause. When it finally came out, it shocked fans, not because it diminished her, but because it showed how deeply human she really was. The fearless pioneer of comedy had her own battles with insecurity, her own struggles to meet impossible standards. And the secret Phyllis Diller kept hidden for so long tells us more about her life, her courage, and her legacy than any joke ever could. Phyllis Diller's path to comedy wasn't straightforward, and that's part of what made her story so remarkable. Born in 1917 in Lima, Ohio, Phyllis wasn't the kind of woman the entertainment industry was looking for in the 1950s. She wasn't the glamorous Hollywood starlet type, nor did she have the connections that many aspiring performers relied on. Instead, she was a housewife with children, living what seemed like an ordinary life. But inside her, there was a fire, a drive to perform and to make people laugh. In her late 30s, at a time when most women were expected to settle into family life, Phyllis took a risk that seemed outrageous. She pursued stand-up comedy. Back then, comedy clubs were dominated by men who leaned on quick insults, barroom humor, or observational bits. The idea of a woman taking the stage to deliver sharp, biting jokes was almost unheard of. But Phyllis didn't just enter the scene. She exploded onto it. Her style was instantly recognizable. She would appear on stage in wild wigs, flashy, mismatched dresses, and with a laugh that seemed too outrageous to be real. But it was her material that hit hardest. Phyllis turned her supposed flaws into her greatest strength. She joked about her looks, her cooking, her housekeeping, and her fictitious husband, Fang, a character who became infamous in her routines. By making herself the butt of every joke, she disarmed critics and made audiences roar with laughter. Yet the brilliance of Phyllis Diller's act wasn't just in her jokes. It was in what she represented. In the 1950s and 60s, women were still expected to be demure, polished, and perfect. Phyllis ripped that image apart. She made it okay for women to laugh at the things they were told to hide: aging, body image, marriage troubles, and personal insecurities. She flipped society's expectations upside down and proved that women could not only be funny but could also dominate the comedy stage. But while audiences saw a woman who seemed brave, bold, and completely at ease with herself, the truth was far more complicated. Off stage, Phyllis wasn't as self-assured as her persona suggested. The very flaws she made jokes about were the ones that haunted her the most. Her outrageous costumes and her cackling laugh became a kind of armor, protecting her from the sting of criticism and rejection. She gave the world the impression that she didn't care what anyone thought of her, but privately, she cared deeply. This tension between her stage persona and her real self grew as her fame skyrocketed. She became a regular on television shows, appeared in movies, and cemented her place as one of the first female superstars in stand-up comedy. Still behind the wigs and makeup, she was a woman battling self-doubt, struggling with her appearance, and quietly carrying the secret that would stay hidden for years. Phyllis had built her empire on laughter, but what she was concealing behind it would eventually reveal a much more vulnerable side of her, one that fans never suspected. And it was this secret that tied directly into the very material that made her a legend. One of Phyllis Diller's most famous trademarks was her endless stream of jokes about her looks. She would stand under the spotlight, wearing garish dresses and wigs that seemed almost cartoonish, and fire off self-deprecating one-liners about her face, her body, or her supposed lack of beauty. "I once burned my hair with the oven," she'd joke, "and it was an improvement." Lines like that made audiences howl. To fans, it seemed like Phyllis had completely embraced her appearance, turning society's cruelest judgments into pure comedy gold. But the reality was very different. What very few people knew at the time was that behind the exaggerated costumes and biting humor, Phyllis had been quietly undergoing a series of plastic surgeries, procedures she kept hidden from the public for decades. At a time when cosmetic surgery was considered shameful and rarely discussed, especially for women in the public eye, Phyllis chose secrecy. She presented herself as someone who laughed at her flaws, when in truth she was trying desperately to erase them. Her decision wasn't driven by vanity alone. Hollywood, even in the 1960s and 70s, was merciless to women. A man could age on screen and be considered distinguished, but a woman who showed the slightest wrinkle was often pushed aside. Phyllis had already broken barriers as a woman in comedy, but she understood the brutal reality. To stay in the spotlight, she had to look the part. And so, while she made fun of herself in public, she quietly scheduled surgeries behind closed doors. Throughout her life, she underwent dozens of procedures: nose jobs, facelifts, eyelid surgeries, chemical peels. The list went on. She didn't flaunt these choices, nor did she publicly admit to them at the time. To the world, she was the outrageous clown who embraced her imperfections. In truth, she was constantly altering her face and body, trying to keep up with an impossible standard of beauty. The secrecy wasn't just about reputation, it was about survival in show business. In an era when plastic surgery was still viewed as a shameful shortcut, a comedian admitting to multiple procedures would have risked becoming the butt of jokes, not the creator of them. Ironically, Phyllis's humor gave her cover. When she mocked her own looks, people assumed it was just part of her act, never realizing that those very insecurities had driven her to the surgeon's chair time and time again. It wasn't until much later in life that Phyllis finally began to open up about her history with cosmetic surgery. In her memoirs and interviews during her later years, she revealed the truth, not with shame, but with the same humor she had always carried. She admitted to dozens of surgeries, often rattling them off like a shopping list, leaving fans stunned not just by the number, but by the fact that she had kept it hidden for so long, for her audience. The revelation was a shock, but it also deepened their admiration. They realized that the fearless woman who laughed at everything wasn't fearless after all. She had simply learned how to disguise her pain with humor. The truth about her surgeries revealed the very human side of Phyllis Diller, a woman who wanted to look better, feel better, and compete in a world that demanded youth and beauty above all else. In many ways, her secret mirrored the struggles of countless women in entertainment. She was fighting against a system that valued appearance over talent, and in doing so, she turned her insecurities into art. While she hid her surgeries from the public eye, she used her jokes to control the narrative, mocking herself before anyone else could. This was the secret Phyllis carried for decades, that beneath the wigs and punchlines was a woman who wanted desperately to be accepted, not just for her comedy but for who she was. And that desire, hidden from the spotlight, reveals a deeper truth about her life than any of her jokes ever could. For audiences, Phyllis Diller was pure joy. Her high-pitched laugh, her chaotic wigs, and her lightning-fast delivery made people believe she was immune to pain. But what fans never saw was the heavy burden she carried behind the curtain. While her jokes made millions laugh, they often came from a place of genuine insecurity. The very flaws she joked about on stage were the ones she agonized over when the lights went out. Plastic surgery, which she had kept secret for decades, became both a solution and a prison. Every time she went under the knife, she hoped it would be the last time, the procedure that would finally make her feel at peace with her appearance. But instead, each operation seemed to only highlight something else she wanted to change. What began as an attempt to gain confidence soon turned into an endless cycle of adjustments, bandages, and recovery periods. She was chasing an image of perfection that never truly existed. The physical toll was immense. Plastic surgery in the mid-20th century was nowhere near as advanced or safe as it is today. Recovery was long and painful. There were risks of infection, scarring, and permanent damage. And yet Phyllis endured procedure after procedure, often returning to the stage before she was fully healed, smiling and laughing as though nothing had happened. Few people realize just how much strength it took to step back into the spotlight after such ordeals. The emotional toll was even greater. Behind her outrageous outfits and over-the-top persona was a woman who feared rejection. Phyllis had broken barriers in comedy, but she was always aware of the double standards that women faced in Hollywood. She knew that if she showed signs of aging, she might be dismissed, replaced, or forgotten. Male comedians could keep performing into old age without anyone questioning their worth. For women, however, wrinkles or gray hair could mean the end of a career. This fear weighed on Phyllis, even as she played it off with jokes. She once said that her humor was a shield, a way of controlling how people saw her. If she could make the audience laugh at her flaws, she could prevent them from laughing at her cruelly. But that shield came at a cost. It meant she rarely let people see her true feelings. Instead, she hid her self-doubt behind punchlines and her surgeries behind makeup. Friends and colleagues who knew her privately sometimes caught glimpses of this struggle. They described moments when Phyllis dropped the act, when she spoke honestly about how exhausting it was to keep up the facade. She worried constantly about her appearance, about her place in the industry, and about whether she was truly loved for who she was, or just for the character she had created. This inner conflict haunted her for years. While she loved making people laugh, she also longed for acceptance without the wigs, the jokes, and the surgeries. She wanted to feel beautiful in her own skin, but the standards of her time never allowed her to believe she was enough. Yet despite the weight of this burden, Phyllis never stopped performing. She kept bringing laughter into people's lives, even when she felt far from laughing herself. And in a way, that was her greatest act of bravery. She turned her personal pain into something that lifted others. The laughter she gave the world was genuine, even if the woman behind it was quietly hurting. The burden she carried remained invisible to the millions who adored her. But understanding it today makes her story all the more powerful. Phyllis Diller wasn't just a comedian, she was a woman who faced her insecurities head-on, turning them into art. And while her secret surgeries were hidden for decades, the weight they placed on her life reveals a side of her that makes her legacy even more extraordinary. By the time Phyllis Diller finally began to open up about her past, she was well into her later years. She no longer needed to protect her image as fiercely as she once did, and society had also begun to change. The stigma around cosmetic surgery had softened, and many celebrities were starting to admit to procedures that once would have been scandalous. For Phyllis, the time had come to tell the truth. In interviews and in her autobiography, she confessed to undergoing dozens of surgeries throughout her life. She didn't reveal it with shame or regret. Instead, she listed her procedures with the same humor she had always brought to the stage. She joked about her facelifts, nose jobs, and tucks, as though they were simply another part of her comedic routine. Fans were stunned not only by the sheer number of surgeries, but also by the fact that she had carried this truth for decades without revealing it. But instead of damaging her reputation, her confession had the opposite effect. Audiences admired her honesty. They saw in her a reflection of their own struggles with self-image and aging. For many women, especially those who had watched Phyllis for years, her openness was liberating. She had taken something that society often treated with secrecy and shame and brought it into the light. This was the final act of Phyllis Diller's career. Not just as a comedian, but as a cultural trailblazer. She had been one of the first women to make it big in stand-up comedy, paving the way for countless female comedians who followed. And now, by openly discussing her surgeries, she was once again breaking barriers, challenging taboos, and giving others the courage to face their own truths. Her legacy, however, was never about the surgeries themselves. They were simply part of her journey. What people remembered most was her ability to turn pain into laughter. She taught audiences that imperfection could be funny, that flaws could be embraced, and that humor could be a powerful weapon against judgment. Even her secret surgeries, once revealed, became part of that lesson, that everyone struggles with insecurity, No matter how confident they appear on the outside, in the years after her revelations, Phyllis continued to inspire new generations of comedians. Stars like Joan Rivers, Ellen DeGeneres, and Kathy Griffin all credited her as a pioneer who made their own careers possible. She had shown that women didn't need to fit into a mold to be funny. They could be outrageous, sharp, self-deprecating, and entirely themselves, even if that self was still searching for acceptance. Phyllis Diller passed away in 2012 at the age of 95, leaving behind a legacy far greater than anyone's secret. She had lived through eras of immense change in entertainment, breaking barriers at every stage. Her laughter, her wit, and yes, even her hidden vulnerabilities became part of a story that still resonates today. The truth she finally shared about her surgeries only made her more human in the eyes of her fans. Instead of seeing her as a flawless comedy queen, people began to appreciate her as a woman who had navigated fame, insecurity, and personal struggle with remarkable courage. She wasn't perfect, and that was exactly why people loved her. In the end, Phyllis Diller's hidden truth didn't tarnish her image. It strengthened it. Her willingness to be honest, even after decades of secrecy, added depth to her legacy. She proved that humor and vulnerability can coexist, that laughter can come from pain, and that the most powerful punchlines are often the ones rooted in truth.